Board. Moderating the panel this afternoon is the Director of Cybersecurity Advocacy North America for ISC Squared, Mr. John McCumber. John's a retired U.S. Air Force officer and former cryptographic fellow at the National Security Agency. He was appointed as a fellow ISC in 2016, an honor that recognizes elite information security professionals who have made outstanding contributions throughout their careers to information security profession. It's not an end-of-tour award. It's a congratulations for a job well done and keep doing it.
It just means I'm old.
Yeah. In this newly established role, John represents 145,000 members as their spokesperson for the profession of cybersecurity. Remember to use Ask Me Search for your questions, and please have them come in. We'd love to have that. Please join me in welcoming John McCumber, and he'll introduce his panel.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here with you today in beautiful Augusta, Georgia. And I know we don't see everybody back yet from lunch, but when they serve fried okra and cornbread, I'm sorry. I'm an adopted Southern kid, so I didn't actually grow up in Illinois, but I live in North Carolina now. So that, and she, offered to serve me sweet tea, which we call the house wine of the South. This is going to be great. We got a great group of individuals here, and we're going to talk about federal, state, and local initiatives with cybersecurity. As Colonel Worley just explained, that I am the Director of Cybersecurity Advocacy for the certifications you love to hate, ISC Squared. And in that role, I spend a lot of my time telling my management and representing things that they need to work on and need to update and do and represent members of this profession. In that role, I get the privilege of representing a lot of cool members of the profession, and those three of those people are sitting to my right now. Let me introduce first to my immediate right, Mr. Fred Beisel. Fred is the founder of the Command Cyber Education and Certification Readiness Facility, or CERF, and it's a collaborative education environment that bolsters the Navy's efforts in mastering the cyberspace domain. Fred's assigned to the Naval Information Warfare Center, Atlantic, the Cybersecurity Education Certification Readiness Facility Manager, and he's got a lot of great awards, including the 2018 Federal Information Security Educators Educator of the Year Award, AFCEA. To give you an idea about that, I think this year was, number 29 or 30 AFCEA meeting. The first one I attended was number 2. Yeah, that's how old I go back. And so Fred's with us today, a great opportunity to hear from him. Also, to Fred's right is Dr. Tom Peters. He's the Executive Director of South Carolina's Coalition for Mathematics and Science, and he as well has had plenty of sweet tea. Dr. Peters serves as Executive Director of that South Carolina's Coalition for Mathematics and Sciences. He holds a doctorate and master's degrees in science education and bachelor's degrees in teaching of biology and in ecology, all awarded from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. To his right is my colleague, Doug Rapp. Doug is the founder and CEO of the Cyber Leadership Alliance. Prior to founding the CLA, Douglas served as a strategic operations and planning specialist for the Military Department of Indiana. Doug's a decorated combat veteran and retired Army officer, and like me, he was a Mustang. So he came up through the enlisted ranks, and he serves as a board member for the Zionsville Chamber of Commerce as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I got 3 wonderful folks here, and we're going to talk about the cyber workforce, federal, state, and local. So we got a great group of people that are going to be doing about it. There's a lot going on right now at the federal level. You're hearing a lot about that here. But does it filter down to state and local entities? What are men and women doing with this knowledge and education? What are they doing individually and collaboratively to build the cybersecurity workforce? At ISC Squared, we produce an annual survey about the state of the cybersecurity workforce, and you've all heard about the gap, right? Depending on who you believe, our number is 2.97 million. And everybody looks at that and they go, that's great. And all the men and women in media and journalism run to their keyboards and type out articles about it's time to pick out the leather for your yacht seats. You're in cybersecurity. Just quit your job, walk down the street, get a 20% uplift, and bring your dog to work. So there's all these articles that come out. And then, of course, if you're like me, I get calls all the time from colleagues going like, you work in this, right? You have this study, right? Where's my job? Where's the $600,000 a year CISO job you're promising me? Where's the leather seats on my yacht? And so one of the things that we like to do is break that down. I'm going to be doing it at RSA here next month when I'm out there talking about those 2.97 million jobs. Of those, 2.2 are in Asia Pacific. Everybody makes the assumption that those are either U.S. jobs or North America. They're not. The vast majority are in Asia Pacific, which is up and coming. Right now in the U.S., we have approximately 500,000 gap showing for the United States. So that's going to help give you a little perspective on when we talk about the gap, why what you're seeing anecdotally may not map to what you're seeing in the media. And it's important for us to dispel some of that. So that's what you're going to hear from my colleagues today. And we're going to talk about efforts that impact all levels of government and are not limited, but include recruiting, evaluating, selecting, paying, placing, and retaining cyber talent. So let's get things started today. I've talked enough. I'd like to go first question to my gentleman to my right, Mr. Beisel. And let's start at the federal level. Mr. Beisel, what do you see as key guidance used at the federal level that possibly can be leveraged at state and local entities? Perhaps things like NIST NICE framework. Do you know any other organizations using that at the state and local level?
So one of the things we're using at the federal government is the NICE framework, and actually I see Bill in the back here, did the presentation. And so what happens with the NICE framework, it identifies the different roles that are being used. It could be a business role, IT, system analysis, cybersecurity, or information assurance. And the folks that are in working, they may cross over, may have some of the roles doing network, some of it may be in information assurance. So you may be crossing different roles that they've identified in the NICE framework. And then the roles in the framework will identify the KSA's knowledge, skills, and abilities that are needed for like routing. So I did a lot of networking. It says here's the KSAs that you need for networking. We use a CDM competency development model that says here's what you're going to have to, the skills that you're going to need. So what we've done at the SURF, the training facility there at NIWIC, is identified different baseline vendors. So we with networking there was Cisco and Juniper were the two that we identified. With the OS, it's Microsoft and Red Hat, and then the VMware, and then cloud. So we've got AWS, and then with this JEDI contract, Microsoft are the two that we've included. And then one of the things we've looked at is, rather than trying to recreate all the curriculum, is to use vendor-developed curriculum. So if it changes, we're not developing, redesigning stuff. And what we wind up doing is a lot of, I'll say, fast-paced, not death by PowerPoint, but the instructional, but getting the hands-on on the skills, so as much labs as possible.
So you're focused on vendors and skills attainment primarily?
Well, we use the vendors as the baseline, and then what we're able to do is we can tailor each class based on who's in the class. So we may include, it may start off with a AWS, but we can say, okay, well, here's AWS, here's how the network works in this, and depending on who's in the class, they may have us using Juniper or Cisco, VMware, and include those. Okay. So we have a baseline class, and then we tailor it as needed.
Excellent, thank you. Hey, and I just want to bring up at this point, before I jump on to Doug Rapp next, if you've got questions, go ahead and raise your hands. We'll try to deal with them as they go. A lot of us here have a classroom experience, so we're used to dealing with that, and be happy to try to address your questions. I'm going to skip Dr. Peters for just a minute, because I got a question that's going to build off what Fred was talking about here. Your work, Mr. Rapp, you look at federal standards and the role that you play with the state of Indiana, and if so, what are they?
So that's a great question. First of all, it's a pleasure to be up here with all of you, and this panel is definitely anchored by, on either end, by two honest brokers for sure, and a lot of expertise here. So we decided very strategically, we being the state of Indiana, decided very strategically when we formed the Indiana Executive Cybersecurity Council that we needed a common vernacular. So we needed common standards. That's not a foreign concept, but what we did was we use NICE as the basis as the launching point. It doesn't cover everything, and there's lots of people who love to throw stones about it doesn't cover this or it doesn't fit this or whatever. I get it, but anybody who's ever written an SOP knows that you got to start from somewhere. If you try and create it from the bottom up, you'll be there all day. So we adopted NIST as the standard that we use as the baseline for everything else that we do. And oh, by the way, all of the other standards map back to it. So they all map back and forth. So, and then NICE, specifically for workforce development, which has been a huge success in Indiana, we decided that the NICE framework was the framework that we were going to use, so that not only when practitioners and people that are in the field are ready, not only so that they can communicate and tie back to the same definitions and terms, but also when we indoctrinate somebody into the cybersecurity system, or when they come into the cybersecurity system or that education, when they have those conversations, we can say, here is the language that we use, because words mean something. And if you don't believe so, ask any CISO what the term incident means. You'll find an insane amount of definitions of exactly what that is. So we decided that particularly NICE and NIST were the baseline that we were going to use. We figured that the thousands of academics and scientists and researchers who have all come together to develop that one standard is probably smarter than a single professor at a university.
That's great perspective on this. And before we start throwing stemmer at each other, I'm going to go to Dr. Peters here quick. Your work is a little more keenly focused on bringing up the next generation of cybersecurity workers and professionals. Would you give us a little background on what your efforts are, Dr. Peters?
Sure, John, I'd be happy to. And I have to admit, so I'm not a cybersecurity expert in any manner, and I was a little befuddled when I was asked to sit on this panel because I had not ever heard of this organization. And up until today, I thought the NICE framework was how to get along on the playground. That said,
it really is.
Well, it's just a different playground than I had imagined. So that said, I do work at the federal, state, and local level, and I'll give you just a couple of quick examples. At the federal level, I've been involved in the Office of Science and Technology Policy's STEM education strategic plan. At the state level, my job is to bring together the whole of the STEM ecosystem, which includes the cybersecurity world and all kinds of other IT issues. At the local level, as part of being a faculty member at Clemson University, and yes, you can feel sorry for me about what happened Monday. I work with some colleagues in computer science, and we're trying to figure out good ways to train teachers to deliver computer science content in school, because there's not a whole lot of them to do it. Which takes me to trying to use some of the language that I understand John is the keeper of, so I'm going to use the term situational awareness here, John, and if I use it wrong, you can correct me later when no one will know. So I'd like to throw out a couple of statistics just to connect this world and my world, because we're all concerned about pipeline and those 500,000 empty cyber jobs. So I'm going to give you a quiz. Recently, ACT taking high school seniors, these are kids who are going to go to college, when they take the ACT, they are asked to give some indication as to what career they wish to pursue. So what percentage of them do you think selected to be, we'll start with the bigger number, math educators? Oh, you're optimistic. But thank you for playing. So the national number is 0.43%. Science is worse. The national number is 0.17%. So on the South Carolina, to give you an idea of what those numbers are, that is a grand total of 33 science teachers and about 90 some odd math teachers. That doesn't do it for like one of our big school districts. So when you start thinking about pipeline, you have to start thinking about what happens before kids get to the point where they're making career choices, the system, folks, is broke. And I'll leave it at that, and we'll see where we go.
That's a great question, because that's one of the things that we talked about in the ready room before we came here. Some of the challenges we see, the reason that I'm glad NICE was brought up in the NICE framework, one of the real values of that, I had the privilege of working with the people there, and one of the real values that continues to bring us is we don't talk about cybersecurity like it's some monolithic job. It's not. My colleague and friend, Dr. Sam Lyles at National Defense University, is fond of saying we made a mistake 50 years ago. We told everybody that IT and coding and all these jobs, they were white-collar jobs. And that was the language we used at the time, right? So these were all white-collar jobs. People all had to go to college for that. And then, of course, people end up rolling into FTE roles where they don't work by hour or product-based kind of things. We made a big mistake back then, right? So a lot of them 50 years ago should have been classified as blue-collar. Now, of course, what we have are new-collar jobs, as we like to talk about. And so the challenge with filling these positions and getting the appropriate education, training, awareness. I know we all word these, and as Dr. Peters alluded to, I'm a big word guy. I was the guy that produced the lexicons for ISC Squared that now we use officially on Capitol Hill and others to educate legislators on how to use words correctly. You know, when they produce legislation, it's horrifying. The last legislation that came out of that on cybersecurity was called, and I work at the Pentagon. I know about doing the acronym first and then the program later. The acronym was the Advanced Cyber Defense Certainty Act, or ACDC. I said, that's really great. If you pass this legislation, we're all on the highway to hell. And so, one of the things that, some people are actually as old as I am. Young people are going, ACDC. So, that's some of the challenges we face in this industry right now. Doug, what are some of the things that you're seeing as people, you're making some significant strides? Not only is Indiana a fantastic state. I said I grew up next door in Illinois, but those people have the best shrimp cocktail in the world if you've ever been to Indianapolis. Doug, why don't you share with us some of those success stories?
Shrimp cocktails?
Oh, dude, does it? Best shrimp cocktail
St. Elmo's, downtown Indiana.
St. Elmo's,
famous.
baby. That's right.
So thanks for that. So I love hearing conversations about how the system is broke. When the system's broke, go around the system. All right, this is why I didn't make a good officer. That's why I retired as a major. So go around the system, reinvent the system. All right. Yeah. So the challenges that we're looking at, Indiana did a great thing, particularly around workforce. I have the great job of being a cheerleader for the state, but we mapped all the assets in the state of Indiana. So we took the data that we knew that we could find from what the job vacancies were. The best data that we could find was on Cybersecurity, which is a great tool out there. So we looked at what the jobs were in Indiana that were needed. We mapped all the universities, every single university doing business in the state of Indiana that offered any cybersecurity content, and we mapped what that content was, whether it was a course, a certificate, a 2-year degree, a 4-year degree, certification, all of those things. So we did that asset inventory for there. And then we started with math. I know it's crazy, but we live in a world full of data right now. So Indiana embraced data. We looked at the data and found out that over 2,000 jobs in the state of Indiana with just the word cybersecurity or security, information security in the title, that there are 2,000 vacancies. Now remember, we look at everything through the NICE standard. If you look at the NICE standard and all the categories of NICE, it was over 6,000 jobs. That included intel, risk, all those other areas that aren't necessarily traditionally thought of as cybersecurity, like engineering. So we looked at that, and then we did the mapping and looked at our universities, and what we found was 600 to 700 graduates with some cybersecurity training per year. Now, I challenge you, if you think that number is dismal, to map your own networks and your own universities, and I guarantee you, you'll be lucky if you come close to that number. We are very blessed, and when we did our asset inventory, we also did a survey of what practitioners and people who are invested in the cybersecurity ecosystem thought was our greatest advantage in Indiana, and hands down was our universities. So we looked at 7 centers of academic excellence, 2 of them in research, great universities like Rose-Hulman that has 100% placement in engineers, Purdue University where Eugene Spafford teaches, one of the founding fathers of cybersecurity, the oldest research center in the United States. We looked at all these things, and we were still only producing 600 to 700 people. So we took the degrees and the content that was being produced, and we put it against the jobs, and guess what? We did a gap analysis. It's crazy. It's crazy stuff. And what we found is that we had 7 SOCs in the state that we knew of that were employing Tier 1 through Tier 3 analysts. All right. So the thought that we needed to produce 700 cybersecurity engineers was really, frankly, it wasn't true. We want to do that, obviously, because we feed the ecosystems all around the United States with our graduates. And is Sergeant Kinzer here? Welcome to Indiana, Purdue University. So he's the one who got the award earlier. So my point being is that we looked at ways that we could keep that talent in Indiana. We don't need to move to the coast anymore to accomplish work. A lot of work is done electronically, and if you haven't embraced that now, you will in the future. So a lot of that work can be done right in our home state. So we looked at ways to attract and keep that talent in Indiana. But we started with the math, and we started with understanding what our assets are. And by the way, this is all basic tenets that I learned in the military. So, and then we didn't wait for the federal government to come in and solve our problems. We didn't wait for huge amounts of funding to come along. We weren't waiting for the big prize. We did things ourselves by creating a public-private partnership between military, academia, state and federal government, and private sector. Out of our strategic plan that we published 2 years ago, the latest strategic plan, we've completed over 73% of all the deliverables in there. So, and I would be happy to share that with you, and that last tenet is about accountability, right? So there's lots of people who want to sell you things. They want to sell you programs. They want to take their program and put their square peg through your round hole, all right? But at the end of the day, we've got the data to hold people accountable. So if somebody's doing, a hackathon and their pitch is that they're generating talent for you, look at the data. Are they really? Are they really doing it? And then spend your money wisely. Invest your money in the things that produce results for you. So, sorry.
No, that's good, because I was going to pitch now to Fred. With your founding work in the Navy, did you run into some of the problems that Doug's talking about?
A lot of them. So, a few things that rang out with me was, one of the things was, if it doesn't work, go around and the thing is, if you go around it, you have to change a culture also, and the ideas of that. The funding was an issue because we had very limited funding. So what we wound up doing was in the dermal process, which is reuse. So we wound up getting a lot of reuse computers. I would get computers, networking equipment, router switches, and find out what worked, what didn't work. And then we used it for hands-on, and it was live labs because just because it worked on Monday, the student would come in and halfway through a class, they're setting up a network, and you'd hear some fan just woo, spin up, and you're like, whoa, I smell smoke, unplug the thing. But it was live, hands-on, and you couldn't plan the labs on what was going to take place. It was anything could happen. It could run flawless, or you'd have just one lab set of gear would just be tear up one piece at a time. But we did it was really focused on a lot of hands-on labs, and we learned by mistakes. And it's like, just try it, let's see what happens, what doesn't work, and a lot of troubleshooting. The other thing that we found out that wasn't planning on was we would have a networking class, but we wound up we had people that had been emailing each other for years and had never met each other. And next thing they start introducing is, oh, I've been emailing you. And so then you've got the culture, it's more of a family. And then also when they're studying for exams or trying to troubleshoot, it's more of you're getting away from these silos of excellence. Well, that's not my problem. You figured out people are giving information that says, oh, I know you guys are getting ready to do this. This is one of the issues we ran into when we did it. So here's a solution that we used. So you're building that communication within the team itself.
Sure. It's funny as I got to know that's how my marriage works now. We email each other, so it's just easier
Probably
that way.
last longer.
Her office is on one side of the house and mine's on the other. We just send hate mail to each other. It's better than arguing in person. Dr. Peters, what about your collaborative efforts here? You run into some of these issues, and can you talk to them?
So there are always issues of communication, in part because the various sectors of the STEM ecosystem use different language. I'm learning a new language this week. It's awesome. But I may say words that don't resonate with people I'm talking to. We work with business and industry. We work with higher ed. We work with K-12. Each one of those entities has its own language. So when you talk about pipeline, when you talk about gaps, when you talk about training, when you talk about certification, you have to know how people interpret all the terms. They're not always the same. But the important thing is you have to talk. Too often what we see happening is someone goes to a conference like this, they recognize there's a problem, they should do something about it, they want to create their own solution. Working separate from the system, even when the system is broken, guarantees the system will never change. So my advice to you is find partners, be a partner, collaborate, listen, learn, talk, then things can change.
That's a great point, and I know we're kind of dwelling a little bit on, these problems of how you change the system, systemic. And I'll give you a great example. I mentioned that we had seven Tier 1 through Tier 3 SOCs in the state. So we identified that really our gap was in getting those analysts into those SOCs, right? Now, that's not just the government, that's private industry. It's enterprise level companies and things. So what are we going to do? Are we going to wait for 4 years for a kid to come through college, and then we're all going to grab him or her, and then fight over them? And everybody knows, if you've been in the industry on the private side for a while, everybody knows the migration of talent. You're lucky if you have somebody for 2 or 3 years before they move on to the next high-paying job. So what are you going to do to solve that? Well, what we did was we took $2.5 million worth of grant money, and we invested it in cybersecurity immersion training. So we have a program now in conjunction with a nonprofit, the 1150 Academy, that does 90-day immersion training program, produces Tier 1 level SOC analysts. So they go into the program. The first steps of it is when they enter, the first day they come through the door, they have to know the A+ material. It gets reviewed. They go into Net Plus, and after that, they go into Sec Plus, and they get the opportunity to take those certifications. That entire time, that content is being explained to them within the confines of a cyber range. We searched the world, literally, to find the right range that accomplished what we wanted to do. And by the way, all ranges are not equal. A military range is incredibly different from an R&D range, which is different from a education range. So we specifically went out and found the best education range, which came out of Israel, Cyberbit. We're very happy with them. And we brought them in, and these young men and young women get to see the content of those certifications hands-on inside the range. And then they go into the remainder of the training time of this 90-day training program, which has over 400 to 600 contact hours, is 14 different automated scenarios. So they use industry-standard tools to use against real scenarios with the background of the internet in there, Apache shutdown, buffer overflow. So when they hit the streets, when they hit the companies, they've seen it. One of our first students was an informatics student out of one of the university, and his comments were, we weren't getting the applied side. I got all the theory, all right? And the final point, I'll leave with that, because I know I talk a lot, but the final point I'll leave with that is, when you do the math and you see the number of jobs that exist out there within your ecosystems, whether it's a state or a company or whatever, you have to understand that there is a place for everybody at the table. Universities, higher education, cannot produce the amount of talent that we need. They can't do it. It's mathematically impossible. So there's plenty of room for alternate ways of doing it, for certifications, for immersion training programs, for accelerated programs like our 11th month 2-year degree down at Muscatatuck Training Center for the military. You have to embrace all those things. So nobody controls cyber.
Yep, no, that's true. And it, Dr. Peter, some of his statistics don't surprise me. Anybody who's been to a high school graduation can tell you, that, when people get to high school graduation, what do you want to be, Sally? What is it? I want to be a teacher. Why? Because that's what she knows. That's what little James knows, and all these other people. Those are the careers they see. How did I end up being an actuary for this brand with a lizard? It's driving me crazy, So you get into all these other jobs that are not really visible to you growing up and doing that. Hey, I see that there's 7 questions available, and I'm going to point to my colleagues in the back, and they're going to come over the loudspeakers like the voice of God, and they're going to let us know what those questions are. Could I have a question, please?
Okay. The first one is actually, we'll do it as a 2-part. How has Indiana made so much progress in such a short amount of time, and what other states do you view as having excellent training and education skills?
That's you, Doug.
Yeah, so we built, our strategy is built on really 4 basic tenets, and that is trust, all right? Everything starts with trust. It's all about relationships. It's all about people. You've heard that from everybody from the commander of Cybercom on down today. Leadership. Leadership not just from the governor's office and creating the Cybersecurity Executive Council, originally started with 22 different subgroups throughout verticals, 220 experts throughout the state. So not only from them, but also thought leadership from universities and particularly from the private industry. The Cyber Leadership Alliance represents $125 billion worth of security interests, so we run the CISO forum. Immediate feedback, direct contact with the CISOs at Eli Lilly, Anthem, Cummins, Rolls-Royce, all of those. So all that communication, so leadership from all of that. Collaboration, understanding that nobody owns cybersecurity. Admiral Rogers said it a long time ago, and everybody likes to quote it, but it's very hard to do, and that is cybersecurity is a team sport. So DHS has a role, Indiana State Police has a role. We all recognize what our roles are and understand that if we synchronize our efforts and we can eliminate redundancy and promote efficiency. And then accountability. Either you're doing it or you're not. We were discussing a little bit earlier that when cybersecurity first came out, the scare tactics and the charlatans that came out and they were like, oh, I do cybersecurity. Everybody did cybersecurity, But we've got the data to measure what people are doing. So, and we're now getting educated. We as a society are getting more educated on what cybersecurity really is. And we knew that learning curve was going to happen. So, but accountability is the last part. And that's how we've managed to do it. We really synchronize a lot of our efforts. And a great example, I'll give 2 real quick examples. The first is when we go after funding, we go after it as a team. So the state of Indiana, one of the universities, private industry. So we recently landed $12 million from the Department of Labor for a cybersecurity apprenticeship program. But what we did is we crosswalked all our needs from our capability gap analysis, and we looked at the things that we needed, and we built those into the proposal, so that we solved multiple problems with a single proposal. A case in point is a cybersecurity tool that's being developed by a small company called Refori that is tied to the NIST standard that a student can go in and get an assessment. A person can go in and get a soft skills assessment and a hard skills assessment, and then it maps back to the KSAs of NICE, which, oh, by the way, maps back to any university that has a CAE designation, because they have to map their curriculum back to NICE. So it maps them back to that pathway and then maps it to employers who need those skills. So we tack that onto the grant. So really that collaboration, accountability, those 4 things, you're never going to get away from personalities. And having spent 34 years in .gov and .mil myself, everybody's fighting for resources. Every environment has its own unique challenges, but business can move faster than government. Government can bring a lot of resources. play to those strengths.
It's good,
So
good
that's what
input.
we've done.
Let's go ahead and grab another question if we could, please.
This question is for Dr. Peters. Where do your South Carolina science and math teachers go to advance their skills? You, NSTA, others?
So, yeah, we do some of that, and I'm happy to plug South Carolina's Coalition for Mathematics and Science because we do work directly with schools and teachers to advance their skills. But we are one of many organizations that offer opportunities for teachers to advance their skills. The bigger issue that we see is the value and perception of teaching in South Carolina and elsewhere is not such that we retain teachers. There are a lot of efforts in South Carolina and other states to recruit teachers, but if you're pouring water into a bucket full of holes, it doesn't really matter how many you recruit. You're always constantly recruiting. So one of the things that we're working on organizationally is we've identified 5 grand challenges in STEM education for South Carolina, all of which are focused on raising the value and perception of STEM education as a STEM career.
Okay.
This one is for all of the panelists. With all of the new initiatives coming out to fill the talent gap, are there any existing programs that should be looked at to grow or improve instead of recreating the wheel?
Fred, you want to jump on that one?
Could you repeat that question?
Not a problem. No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I wasn't trying to surprise you.
Who do
So-
we name are the winners?
Yeah.
I don't have any problem naming winners. There's winners and losers in life. So those programs that are efficient
Yeah.
and produce results should be the winners. All right, that's our system is built on free enterprise. So they're absolutely. The problem is the government can't pick winners and choosers by their mandate. But what I'll tell you is that there are great initiatives out there. I would say look at certifications and training academies for your entry level forces. Stop focusing on creating only the top tier, the gold standard folks, and learn how to create practitioners, which is why China's about ready to swamp us in AI, because they're stealing our tools, but they've got 10 times the amount of people that know how to use them. So work on creating practitioners so cybersecurity immersion training, accelerated programs. And by the way, the quicker you get somebody back out into the workforce, the better it is for not only your security, but for your economy.
Yep.
So look at ways of taking traditional training in academia and putting it into a way that our children learn today.
Yeah, and something I heard from the podium here this morning that I cautioned you about. I mean, I heard people kept talking about rock stars. For God's sakes, if you hear that, your BS flag should go up immediately, And the point is, and then they talk about having 2 million people that are just, I guess, grist for the mill as we sift through these poor slobs to find that handful of rock stars. And that's not what this career is. Anybody who's been a practitioner in this career has done, some of the work is drudgery, some of the work is painful, some of the work involves spreadsheets and sitting in a SOC or a NOC somewhere. And so this is a job. And it's not about, the Rockstar focus has given us an entire generation of charlatans that have come up, that still, ply their trade in this. And I think it's important to understand that there's discipline involved with this and practitioner and work that needs to be done. And not all of it's involved, keynoting conferences and everything else. A lot of it's doing governance, risk, and compliance for organization. What's another question?
So wait, John.
Yeah,
so
please.
before you go there,
Please.
Fred, do you want it, or do you want to wait a sec?
Well, so one of the things that we look at is with the government, we get folks at all skill levels, and it's a matter of identifying and giving the resources available to up their skill set. That's kind of one of the things, so they're not recreating the wheel. And helping them and building a set of resources available that they can use and get hands-on experience with it. That's kind of what we're looking at.
So I do want to take a shot at the question because I do want to name a winner, and it's a bunch of rock stars. But the way I define them, John, not the way they were defined earlier. So an organization that I think is a real winner, and not just for cybersecurity, but for STEM education and broadening the base, is an organization called Million Women Mentors. As I look out in this audience, just like many other STEM-focused conferences I've been in, the demographics don't represent the world. And you're not going to get a bigger pipeline if you don't address that.
Well, that's a great point. Something I'm going to address at RSA here next month in my presentation is the numbers are going great. When I first saw the numbers, we did an independent statistically significant survey because they said, like women, in our field is 11 to 13%. Now, anytime you see numbers, the next question out of your mouth is, where do you get those numbers from, which I do a lot of in my work. So it turns out that there was a 1998 survey of IT, and so people just said, well, IT, it's the same makeup as cybersecurity. The numbers we came up with are approaching 30% now, specifically for cybersecurity by doing it. That's great news. Now, we're not going to solve this problem overnight, but I think the numbers are trending in the right direction. And so the key is to keep that focus there. I think it's a great point you bring up. And there's organizations that specifically allow people a comfortable environment for them to succeed. And I think we can't do enough of that. Let's get another question.
So that's interesting. You were talking about numbers. The question is, can you describe any Indiana cyber strategy metrics or indicators of success that were meaningful or informative?
Yeah, absolutely. We measure success. We actually, from our strategic plan, we have completed 72% of all the deliverables in there. And those deliverables range in complexity and breadth and depth quite a bit. So to include a cybersecurity scorecard that can be used for SMBs, that's a success story. Incident responder toolkit for cybersecurity. So anybody who's familiar with incident response and incident management, the development of essentially what's an ESF 16, but it's really a cybersecurity component for emergency management. So these are some of the tools. We have a legislative outline now on how to incentivize businesses to come to Indiana. We're looking at things like offering businesses opportunities, free risk assessments to incentivize them and to help them and know and grow. So there's plenty of stuff out there. But I would say the statistic that we're most proud of is that 72% completion rate within 2 years of all the deliverables. And our strategic plan is posted publicly. So if anybody wants to fact check or take a look at what we're doing, feel free to go just search Indiana cybersecurity, government or something like that. It'll pop up. But yeah, we're particularly proud of that statistic, that 72 completion rate of the deliverables. So,
any more questions for us?
So I've got one more on the theme of the panel. How do you feel you can increase the workforce training across the federal, the state, and the local levels? And are there multiple solutions that can be achievable?
That's a great question. Fred, you want to tackle this for a minute?
Sure. There's a lot of resources available, and one of the things that we've done is going out looking to see what systems are we using with the government, and that's where we identified particular vendors, and then what we try to do in-house is cover I'll say a baseline level, and what resources have already been created. So like with IC Square, we're not, and we discussed this, so we don't have a team that's sitting there developing, here's what I think we need to pass the CISSP exam. They've already have vendor developed curriculum, here's how it changed, here's the new material, and we just need folks that are comfortable with the material. And what happens is, so we do that with the CompTIA, there's the Security Plus, the CASP. Cisco has the CCNA, CCNP, CCNA Security. Juniper has a few same type of certifications. And Microsoft also has, Red Hat has those exams, RHCSA, RHCE. And then the cloud has been the huge push here recently. And it's too new, it's too dynamic for me or one of our team members to develop curriculum, and we can't even come close to using what the vendor has already developed. And they've got a lot of resources available for the academic. And then, so we're, with the government, we're kind of not really academic, but we're not a private training. So we're kind of in that gray area with that one. So we use a lot of vendor-developed curriculum, but there's a lot of resources.
And it all begins and ends with being able to adequately describe the foundational knowledge you want men and women to bring to the field, and then what you're willing to train them to do. What we have right now is, we're all familiar, all of you have seen what we call those unicorn position descriptions. When they publish a job description for the job I currently have, I go, I'm not qualified on 60% of this stuff. You know, and we've all seen the ones, and in the role that I have, you know, in ISC squared, we've all seen the one, hey, we want an intern, we want to pay somebody, you know, $32,000 a year. They have to have, you know, 8 years experience in cloud and a CISSP. What? You know, so we just have these disconnects. And, you know, everywhere, everybody's looking for a shortcut, right? If I could just say, hey, I need somebody with a CCSP, an SSCP or something, and then that takes up for the fact I don't have to write 200 words, I'm golden. And that's what a lot of people want to do. But, you know, being from Illinois, you know, one of my, growing up in school, one of my favorite poets at the time was the poet E.E. Cummings. And, of course, you know, he was lowercase letters and didn't like punctuation. But he did say at one time, to him, the more beautiful answerer who learns to ask the more beautiful question. And what we really need to do is ask that more beautiful question in cybersecurity. And what are the skills, knowledge that I expect people to come into this job? What am I willing to train? And what are they going to gather from their experiences here? And then, you know, we put together, you know, the educational part of this, the experiential part of this, as well as foundational knowledge will be much more effective in defining and filling these roles. Anyway, I'm sorry. Is there any more questions? Or I think my screen went blank.
So that was the last question, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anything from anybody sitting here that's occurred to you that we can address while we're here? Yes, sir. How do you identify talent? Let's go down the line and see who wants to answer that one.
I'll take that one.
Yep. Yeah, of course you will, Doug.
So I always, of course, why wouldn't I? So I always like to tell this story, and my son hates me for it. But my son was the most mediocre high school student that ever existed. He couldn't have been more average if he'd have tried, and I think he did, really. And he comes by that honestly. So one day he was living in my basement, and he was on the computer down there, because that's what young men do nowadays. And I asked him, I got frustrated. I said, man, what are you doing? You've been down here for days. And he's like, well, he said, well, I downloaded a bunch of stuff off of Gary's mod, and I'm stringing them all together in Lua, and we've rented server space, me and a couple of guys I met online, and we're hosting our own game. And I'm like, what? I'm like, you're programming in Lua? I'm like, what is Lua? I don't even know. Well, apparently it's a gaming language. Yeah. So here's a kid who was, I mean, I'm talking 2.5. You couldn't be any more in the middle of the road. And now he's programming in Lua. So I asked him, I'm like, man, where did you learn this? And he looked at me without skipping a beat, and he said, YouTube University. So my point to that is that, and I go back to breaking the systems, all right? Yeah. There is a place for everybody in the tent, all right? But it's time to invent new ways to do things. And it's time to look at talent when we can statistically measure talent now to a great degree with the technology that we have. One of the things that we did in Indiana, I'll give you a great example, and I touched on it just a little bit earlier, and that was making sure that the company who is developing that talent assessment tool was part of that grant. So making sure that we needed to fill that gap in our area. So Indiana, with the help of Refori and Purdue University, we've created a tool that will assess. Anybody can take it, and it will assess where you fall within the NICE KSAs, And then we can point you to whatever your goal is, whether it's to get into, if you're working professional, getting into the workforce as quickly as possible, then maybe that tier one level analyst immersion training program, which, oh, by the way, because it's mapped back to the NICE standard, we can now speak in higher education ease, and they, through partnerships with higher education, they are actually giving college credit for it, which, oh, by the way, feeds their adult degree completion programs and their adult education programs as these people progress. So we look at assessing the talent, based on what their capabilities are, and mainly the way that we intend to do it is through that tool.
Well, and I think everybody, or most of you in this room here, be familiar with an acronym we know. It's called the Asvab. I took it. I know Doug took it, and so we all took it. And one of the projects I'm working on with IBM Watson is to develop an Asvab for cybersecurity. So it's a very similar tool to what my father took before he came in the Navy, how many years ago, and I know Doug took it, and I certainly took it when I came on board and enlisted in 1977.
Yeah, so I got infantry, by the way.
Yeah, they made the guy in
tells
front
you
of
how
me.
well I did on the test.
Your son did better than me at school. I was an honor student in high school. Yes, Your Honor. No, Your Honor. I'm sure that won't happen again, Your Honor. Yeah.
John, you got a question?
Yeah, question. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So every P3, we've had some very successful P3s, particularly one great example is our Secretary of Commerce office is a public-private partnership, so especially recognizing that, again, business can move faster than government. So every P3 is different. Be happy to offline share some insights on what we're doing and how we're doing it, but everyone really is unique and should fit the needs of the stakeholders. So I know we're over time, so I don't want to.
Well, actually, we're coming up on time, so we've got another couple minutes, so we can address another question if you got it.
Yeah. Or I'll take a swing at the
go ahead.
talent thing from the world of academia. So one of the things that we always want to remember is there are a lot of proxy measures for talent in academia. And probably the biggest proxy measure for talent in academia is GPA. And that has held sway in terms of a whole lot of things for a whole lot of years. And we do have to get beyond that. We have to get beyond that in academia. And I don't have a ready solution for that, but I do want to go back to a conversation we had in the ready room. And John collects art, and he was relaying a story about asking adults to raise their hand if they were good at drawing. So we'll ask that question.
Yeah.
So who's good at drawing?
How many would like to come up and draw? See, there we go.
Yeah.
We got one or two.
So what happens if you ask kindergartners that question?
How many people? Everybody?
Every single hand. So now if you change that question to good at science or good at computing or good at whatever, you get the same response. You get very few hands of adults and multiple hands of young children up until about middle school. So what are we doing?
Our educational standards we use and others are destroying our educational. So they're destroying creativity and everything else in our men and women.
You want to change the game? Make coding a foreign language. Seriously, a foreign language credit. So the first state that figures that out can actually get it through their bureaucracy will be a huge winner. And started at K through 12. So that's the way our generations today talk.
Yep.
We're cyber converts.
Yep.
They're cyber natives. So that is their language.
Very true.
Gentlemen, I hate to end that, but please welcome Mike Warlick back to the stage.